What's up friends, it's Endymion, and before I even begin this video, I can already hear the keyboards clicking and the phones tapping, so let me clear something up before we move forward. No, this video is not some gotcha against Xbox or anything like that. In fact, I will actually explain how if Xbox leaves the gaming space entirely, it'll be bad for gaming. I also want to explain how in a lot of ways Xbox is responsible for massive successes like PlayStation. You'll see what I mean as we continue along. So this is not a console war video. Anyway, let's get going. If you have even a small interest in gaming news, you probably heard about the massive Xbox leak that happened, where everything Microsoft plans on doing for the next 5 or so years got leaked. This all happened because of Microsoft wanting to buy Activision Blizzard, and these files got leaked during all of this, and now here we are. So we know things like Oblivion and Fallout 3 are getting remasters, somehow Ghostwire Tokyo is getting a sequel, and there's a new Doom game called Year Zero. Weirdly though, in these documents nothing was said about the future of Halo, which is arguably Xbox's biggest franchise. Either what's happening with Halo didn't leak, or they genuinely have nothing planned for the next 5 years. I don't know, and I can't tell you which of these probabilities are real since we just simply don't know. However, the part of this leak that both inspired this video and worried me was this particular segment where Phil Spencer said if Xbox Game Pass doesn't grow enough by 2027, that Microsoft will likely just throw in the towel and exit gaming altogether. That statement and possible reality is knocking futs to wrap my head around, dear viewer, because without a healthy Xbox ecosystem, I know the PlayStation fans would be happy to hear that, since in a way they could officially claim they won the annoying console war that's been brewing for ages now. But on the flip side of things, this possible reality could be really bad for gaming as a whole too. Phil Spencer himself said, and I quote, "I can safely say that if we do not make more progress than this off console, we would exit the gaming business, and if this were the outcome, I don't believe we'd still be in the business. A majority of our customers are found off of our own hardware, I would hope by earlier than 2030. So when you ask me if I agreed with this chart that the light green and blue, depending on what colors you see there, would have to be much larger, much earlier. I would say by 26-27 that we should be in that position, or we would have to make a different decision with the business," end quote. So this hypothetical endgame scenario Microsoft is preparing for would result in one of the biggest players in gaming leaving entirely. So what would that look like? And is that good for modern gaming? In my opinion, not exactly. You see, it's common sense when it comes to any industry that competition is vital to the growth and innovation of anything. Imagine if instead of having many different cars available from different manufacturers, there was only 1 or 2 of them. The innovation of the automobile industry would stagnate and prices could be controlled with such a grip that as customers, you're screwed no matter what you do. But since of course there's many car manufacturers out there, it means they need to compete for your money. With video games, it's the same thing, and I would argue that Microsoft's existence is why PlayStation is so successful. In fact, I would go as far as to say that Xbox saved PlayStation. Let me explain. In the early years of my life, we had stuff like the Super Nintendo, Dreamcast, and the original PlayStation. In the early 2000s, you could argue the 3 core spaces were Nintendo, Sony, and PC gaming in general being its own thing. Because of this, the only competition really for Sony was Nintendo. And in a lot of ways, when the PlayStation 2 launched in 2000, even Nintendo wasn't really competition for it, since the PS2 was much more powerful than anything Nintendo had at the time. And you could argue Sony had an absolute stranglehold on gaming as well. A year later, Microsoft would enter the space with the original Xbox, and that would change everything. Because now the PS2 had actual competition that could match its power and had unique experiences like Halo Combat Evolved, for example. These titans would clash, and eventually we'd enter the PS3 and 360 era. Arguably, for most of this era, which I consider to be one of the most important in gaming in general, Xbox was slapping PS3 around like a red-headed stepchild. This was mostly because the PS3 was hard to develop for unless it was a first-party release. Its infrastructure was not third-party developer friendly, which is why many third-party releases either came out late on PS3 over 360, or they ran and chugged because these third-party games were difficult to design to mesh well with PS3's sophisticated and really weird hardware. This is also why if you own a PS4 or PS5 and wonder why Sony hasn't been able to get their PS3 era games to be downloadable but only streaming as of now anyway, it's because of the unique and very rigid software that PS3 games had to adhere to. On the flip side, you had the 360, an amazing little device that I loved playing on. By the way, I had both the 360 and PS3. Anyway, the 360, while it's red-ringed so often you likely knew multiple people who dealt with that, the reality was that the 360 was very easy to develop for. It also ushered in the indie game scene with Xbox Arcade, so in a lot of ways the 360 was a pioneer for its time. And I would argue it's one of the most important consoles of all time. When it came to the PS4 and Xbox One era, however, it's like Sony and Microsoft swapped places, with the PS4 in a lot of ways mimicking what the 360 was. It was more powerful than the 360, obviously, since it was next gen at the time, but a lot of what made the PS4 great was because it was basically like the 360. Sony completely revamped how games could be made on the PS4 and made it closer to a PC than the very rigid and archaic design of the PS3. Whereas Microsoft went the opposite way and turned the Xbox One into this weird home TV hybrid device, this moment was what costed Microsoft the console war, if you want to call it that. Even things like having monthly games being available via subscriptions was originally an Xbox Live thing, and Sony copied Xbox and made PlayStation Plus, and that's how that all came to exist. Sony also changed their business model too, since on PS3 anyway, multiplayer was largely free. But it was also very limited since PS3's communication efforts were pretty damn terrible, especially when you compare it to Xbox Live Party Chat. And since Microsoft charged players to play online, now suddenly on PS4 and onward, PlayStation did the same thing even though it was free before on PS3 and below. Sony also copied Xbox's Party Chat and made their online much better too. And when you look at more recently, Xbox brought about GamePass, and Sony yet again basically copied what they were doing and changed PlayStation Plus to be like it too. So, in a lot of ways, if you look at it critically without being a console fanboy or girl, a lot of what made PlayStation successful was not their own ideas. They just copied Xbox's ideas like Party Chat, Game Pass, and making their system easier to develop for, all because Microsoft had done that to great success. This, of course, all tipped over because Sony would then release exclusives, and now we are where we are. So, in a lot of ways, whether you're a PlayStation diehard fan or not, you have to admit and come to understand that a lot of the things you love about your console of choice were not ideas that Sony came up with on their own. And a lot of the actual success PlayStation has is directly connected to the existence of Xbox. And if it weren't for Xbox doing what it did when it did it, gaming would actually be worse now too, because Sony would have no reason to make their console easier to develop for, and giving you monthly games or Game Pass services or actual functioning party chats or the push for amazing exclusives would not exist if Xbox wasn't there. I mean, Sony is the same company that rejected From Software because Demon's Souls didn't sell well in Japan and they were convinced it was a flop. Then it released in North America to critical acclaim, and Sony lost their opportunity to buy From Software for pennies compared to what they're worth now. So it's not like Sony was this paragon that knew everything. They've made tons of mistakes. Remember when their PSN network was down for months and it killed games like SOCOM? They aren't perfect either. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that PlayStation's success is because of Xbox existing, and there's no denying that. So if we were to hypothetically go into a future scenario where Xbox is done and gone, PlayStation as a platform would likely stagnate. And Sony's need for blockbuster, amazing exclusive games would also become less important. Because with this massive gaping hole where Xbox once was, Sony wouldn't really need to try anymore. Sure, you could say, well, what about Nintendo? But the reality is that Nintendo and Sony haven't been competing for decades at this point anyway. Nintendo games are largely made for children, and I don't mean that in a bad way or anything. Nintendo's continued success is a masterstroke of brilliance no matter how you slice it, since nothing Sony or really anybody does can match the releases of stuff like Pokemon or Smash Bros. Nintendo doesn't compete because they don't need to. Hell, even the Switch now has probably worse party chat optimization than the PS3 did, but Nintendo doesn't care. Because unless suddenly an alternative to Nintendo suddenly existed that exclusively targeted the young demographic, they don't need to change. In a way, you want to know what Sony and PlayStation would be like without Xbox existing? Just look at Nintendo right now. And it's not to say that Nintendo is bad, but they just have no reason to innovate anything really either. I mean, Tears of the Kingdom, which I played for a couple of hours, just feels like an expansion to Breath of the Wild, which I put like 90 hours into back in 2017. Nintendo has no need to reiterate Zelda too much, because there's no competition for it anyway on their console or their market. Without an Xbox to challenge PlayStation, gaming would simply stagnate. Likely, if anything, the most possible scenario if Xbox were to leave gaming behind, I believe it would be in a hardware sense at best. Microsoft obviously owns Bethesda, and they will eventually own Activision Blizzard too. Sure, let's say the Xbox brand as we know it dies and evaporates. Microsoft could just leech off the success of places like Bethesda and Activision for the rest of time. And they could just release all their stuff on PlayStation, PC, and hell, even Nintendo as well. They would still make a ton of money, and they would just strengthen Sony's console, sure, but they would also make bank off the games they own on Sony's too. So it's not like if Xbox evaporates, then Microsoft is done and loses. Honestly, it would probably save them a ton of money in the long haul too, since they wouldn't have to worry about making consoles or paying developers to put their stuff on things like GamePass. They just release Halo whatever, Forza number 1000 and stuff like the next Doom or Call of Duty, and they would just rake in the billions without literally lifting a finger. So yes, if Xbox were to leave the console market behind, in a lot of ways it would just free Microsoft of the constraints of their dying platform. And they'd likely make a ton of money anyway on platforms like PlayStation by licensing their games out anyway. So ultimately, Microsoft would become like Sega did when the Dreamcast failed. They kept releasing games, they just didn't do the console stuff anymore. Would that be good for gaming? Maybe. I mean, imagining a future PlayStation 6 that has God of War, Halo, Forza, Gran Turismo, Ghost of Tsushima, and stuff like Starfield, Elder Scrolls 6, the next Doom, and so on and so on. Yeah, it would be amazing for PlayStation fans. But it would also be amazing for Microsoft too, since they could just sit back, write some checks, and watch everyone give them their money while never needing to compete again. And it would actually kill the console war that's been mindlessly being fought for decades now, unfortunately. And if you want some numbers based on these FTC leaks and whatever, we can now more accurately see what the big three's net revenues are too, with Sony's revenue almost being equal to both Xbox and Nintendo. And again, I'm not sharing this as some gotcha nonsense. I'm just telling you the cold hard facts. It just shows you that Microsoft is likely going to eventually end their Xbox support in the coming future. Of course, net revenue doesn't mean that it's all profit, but I'm just showing you the numbers and letting you draw your own conclusions about it. So if you are an Xbox diehard fan, you're probably punching the air while watching this video, and look, I get it. I remember abandoning Xbox back in 2013 after that disastrous E3 conference, where Sony said you could share your games when Microsoft wanted everyone to pay even when sharing.
This is how you share your games on PS4. Thanks.
PlayStation.
But you gotta look at it this way. It's not like Xbox won't exist to some capacity going forward. Sure, the refrigerator of a console might become obsolete and Game Pass will likely be jettisoned in the sun because it's not justifying its own existence. Even in those FTC documents that leaked, we have actual proof that Phil Spencer asked if Game Pass subscriptions had gone up in the last 9 months. To which it was said that the platform was stagnating. So I don't want this video to be some PlayStation is better nonsense, as Xbox's stuff is clearly very neatly tied to PC right now as well. My opinion is if I was an Xbox diehard fan right now, I would probably migrate myself to PC at the very least, since everything you have on Xbox can be enjoyed there anyway. And it's not like many Xbox fans are even playing their Series X's anyway, since also from those leaks we found out that around 75% of Xbox Series owners actually own the S version over X. So that means 75% of next-gen Xbox owners right now aren't even using the most powerful hardware anyway, and look, don't get mad at me about that. I'm just telling you what's being leaked. So clearly, even when it comes to having access to more power, the Xbox fanbase didn't embrace it anyway. And I don't blame them, since the Series S is cheaper and can play the same games anyway. I mean, sure, they're not at the same resolutions or whatever, but come on, times are hard. And not everyone has tons of money, so I totally understand. I don't want this video to divide people or say PlayStation is better or anything like that. I want us all to objectively look at what's happening and simply just come to terms with it. Xbox won't die permanently, and PlayStation fans should absolutely be grateful to the Xbox community as well, since a lot of what makes PlayStation great is because of Xbox. If anything, I just want this stupid console war to end. And I want to just bring people together who are usually at each other's throats and understand that your allegiance to these machines is misguided. And instead, we should just find common love in the thing that we all enjoy, which is video games. The future is uncertain, of course, and I won't have all the answers. And I will absolutely make stupid comments where clearly I was wrong, like saying Starfield has no space powers, which yes, I was wrong about that, and I apologize. But I hope this video helps you understand that we're stronger together, and I really don't want players at each other's throats over something like allegiances to mega corporations that don't care about us anyways. So I hope this video helped you when it comes to understanding what's happening and how this community is stronger when it's united. So thank you for watching, subscribe for more in the future, and like the video to help the channel out. Have a great day, enjoy gaming, and I'll see you in the next one.